Okay, there we go. We finished sensory memory, short-term memory, and to jog our memory, our long-term memory, these are the 3 stages of a particular model, the information processing model of memory. Talk about the most brief, which is sensory memory. Short-term memory, which is probably a lot shorter than you think. It's only up to about 30 seconds. If you can remember something for 5 minutes and you haven't been rehearsing it continuously, it's already in your long-term memory. If you can remember something for 2 minutes and you haven't been rehearsing it continuously, it's already in your long-term memory. Short-term memory is only up to about 30 seconds. So let's talk about this long-term memory thing. We've already defined it. We've talked about elaborative rehearsal, how that's a more meaningful way to get something into your memory, to your long-term memory. Now let's actually go into the types of long-term memory. So first of all, you're going to see that they're broken out into number 1 and number 2, procedural long-term memory and declarative long-term memory. Procedural you'll see sometimes referred to as non-declarative. We're going to call it procedural in here, but if you see non-declarative, that's what procedural. Sometimes you'll see that referred to as non-declarative long-term memory. Declarative and non-declarative. We're going to call it procedural and non-declarative, or procedural and declarative. So starting with number 1, procedural. Memory, your book says this is the memory for skills, procedures, habits, and conditioned responses. Skills, procedures, habits, and conditioned responses. Here's what your book means. It's kind of like the how to do something memory. Procedures. How do you do something? How do you bake a cake? How do you ride a bike? If you know how to bake a cake and you can give me the procedures, that's your procedural long-term memory you're accessing. But they also include conditioned responses. Go back to classical conditioning. Those conditioned responses to something. Little Albert's fear to the white rats. Salivating to the bell. Apparently, those become so ingrained that they include them as a procedural long-term memory. And I say so ingrained because something interesting about procedural long-term memory. These are hard memories to lose. What I mean by that is if you know somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's and they've lost some memory, does anyone know someone going through an illness where they've lost some memories? Okay. So here's what it might look like. You show up and you go, Grandpa, what are you sitting out here on the step for? It's snowing. You have a t-shirt on, Grandpa. It's freezing. Let's go back inside. You go back inside. Grandpa, come on, put your sweater on. He goes, oh, okay. And he puts his sweater on. He didn't forget how to put his sweater on. He forgot that you should put a sweater on when it's cold outside. He didn't forget how to do it. He started his procedural memory. Grandpa, shut the stove off. Oh my gosh, we're going to burn the house down, sweetie. Oh boy, how did I forget that? And he shuts it off. He didn't forget how to shut it off. So these procedural long-term memories, they last a long time, even when our other declarative long-term memories start to fade. He might forget who people are. He might forget about things like that. But he'll still remember how to put his pants on. Procedural long-term memories. But I say they're hard to lose. But if you know someone who's gone through dementia or Alzheimer's, you can lose it. You know, it's kind of sad. Somebody can get to the point where they forget how to put their pants on, how to go to the bathroom. Somebody was just telling me they work at a facility where lots of people there have Alzheimer's or a type of dementia, and a man was talking on the phone. And he seemed to be doing pretty good on the phone, putting his sentences together with someone who's feeling. And when he got done with the phone, he started to shake a little bit. He got tears in his eyes. And he was just holding the phone. And it was a corded phone, or it was connected. I guess corded would be good. And he was standing there, and she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "What do I do with this now?" He forgot the procedural long-term memory of how you hang a phone up. So they do stick around things. They do stick around a long time. They can be lost. But we tend to hang on to procedural long-term memories longer than we do the declarative long-term memories. Let's talk about what those are. The book says declarative long-term memory is memory for facts and information. Facts and information. It's the what we know memory, not how to do memory, like procedural. It's what we know. It's the what we know memory. So you might know a certain thing, a fact. Like, does anyone know what Latin for always is? Semper. Semper fidelis. Always faithful. Okay. Some of you might know, what was that planet that was way out there that's no longer a planet, now it's a planetoid? Poor little Pluto. If you could think about what your first job was, where you got paid. Babysitting, delivering papers, working at McDonald's, whatever your first job was that you ever had, if you can access that, that's a long-term memory. These are all examples of declarative long-term memories, but they're different kinds. Semantic long-term memories, that's a type of declarative long-term memory, so little a, semantic memories. These are a type of declarative long-term memories that contain general knowledge that anyone has the ability to know. Semantic memories are the kind that anyone has the ability to know. They're the kind of memories you would access to answer questions on, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Who wants to be a millionaire? Jeopardy. What's Latin for always? Everyone has the ability to know that. Not everybody has that long-term memory. You may not have ever learned that. But everyone has the ability to. That's a semantic memory. That's what the planets' names are in order, what that last planet was that is no longer. And then there's a kind of memory for our first job, for our first kiss. That's an episodic long-term memory. Episodic memory is a type of declarative long-term memory that contains somewhat autobiographical memories. Somewhat autobiographical. Not everyone has the ability to know these long-term memories.
Did you also say personal?
Personal, yeah, that's what it means, personal. Somewhat autobiographical, personal to you. You're going to access your episodic memory for things like your first non-familial kiss, somebody in your family that you kissed, or wasn't in your family and that was your first kiss. You can conjure up a name, face. That is an episodic long-term memory. Not everyone has the ability to know that. Okay. So this is just a little pictorial representation for visual. So you've got two kinds of memory, long-term memory, declarative and procedural. Procedural is like riding a bike. Declarative is broken into two, semantic and episodic. Semantic, who gave the Gettysburg Address? Well, that would have been Abraham Lincoln. That's my semantic memory. Who was my first non-familiar kiss? Oh, Scott. So, those are long-term memories. This is similar to your book as well. Broken out the same way, just without the cute picture. There we go. We talked about sensory, the very briefest kind of memory in this particular model, information processing model. Most information is going to be lost within a second or so unless we attend to it, pull it into short-term memory, and we can say the pizza number over and over and over and over and over, maintenance rehearsal, keep it in short-term memory, really relatively indefinitely. Or we can, there's this process called consolidation. We can move it to long-term memory. That's putting it in the file cabinet in long-term memory. If we're not reversing it, we've only got, this one says 15 to 30. 12 to 20, 12 to 30 seconds. It's right around this range. If you're longer than about a half of a second, or I'm sorry, yeah, half of a minute, not a second. If you remember information longer than for about half of a minute, it's important to remember, it's already moved to long-term memory. Short-term memory is much shorter than what I think people think it is. If you're going longer than about half of a minute, it's already moved to long-term memory. And then this long-term memory information is retained indefinitely, although it might be difficult to retrieve, and we're going to talk about that. But it's that interesting, relatively permanent storage spot. Let's take a minute to talk about what influences memory. There are certain reasons our memory, obviously, for our long-term memory is better for some things than it is for others. I'm going to read to you a list right now. And I'm going to tell you right off the bat. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to ask you to write down what you can remember from this list. It's not a very long list. But don't write anything until I'm done. Just wait. And actually, don't write until I ask you to write. Just listen to the list and then I'm going to ask you to recall it. Then we're going to talk about things that influenced it. Zebra, flamingo, hippo, dog, skunk, bear, tiger, parrot, bear, penguin, giraffe, mouse, fox, apple, llama, ferret, sheep, buffalo, kangaroo, cat, deer, chimpanzee. So that's the list. And now I want you to take a minute, write down anything you remember from that list. Everything you remember. I don't care what order. Just write down everything you can remember from the list. Wow, you guys are good. Somebody's so right in the list. Okay. All right, now look at your list. How many of you, and all of those items, or 22 items, how many of you remember apple? Raise your hand if you've got apple on your list. Okay. Raise your arm pretty high. Now turn around. I want everyone to kind of look around. Look at our number of hands. That's a very high number in the class's size to remember apple. Why do you remember apple, by the way?
Because it wasn't the animals.
Huh?
It wasn't the animals. It was random.
It's the fruit among the animals. Okay, so it was unusual. How many of you had something on your list, like llama? How many of you had llama on your list? Why did you have llama on your list? Any reason?
Random animal.
It's a random animal. It's like an unusual one. Anyone else have a reason? Anyone else have something on the list of an animal that they really dislike? Like Mike, what do you have on your list?
Cat.
You don't like cats. Okay, so it's on your list?
Cat hater.
Okay. Cat hater, okay. We tend to remember, there are going to be three things that I talked about, what influences memory. We tend to remember things that are unusual. Apple among the animals. The llama because it's an odd. I remember llama all the time because Napoleon Dynamite. Tina Llama. Did anyone add something on there because they own it?
Kind of.
Cat and dog.
Cat and dog.
Well, I had zebra. I don't really own a zebra, but I own a lot of zebra stuff.
Ah!
So that's why.
It was meaningful to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Kristen?
Well, when you said llama, I thought, I don't know, like my Uncle Jay had llamas.
Okay.
So.
That came to your mind. Okay, good. Meaningful. All right, that's it. So remember things that are unusual, remember things that are meaningful. So if you look at your list, you probably have something on there that you remember because it was meaningful to you.
What about, I don't know how this really fits in, but like with any kind of memory, especially I guess short term, when they like have a crime happen and they get witnesses and they're always wrong. Because I saw one time they did like a classroom experiment type of thing, and the students didn't know about it. And a guy came in, snatched the teacher's purse, and then ran off. And the teacher said, "What did he look like?" And no one, like they had all sizes wrong, colors wrong, everything wrong.
You're going to read about how reliable memories are. Turns out they're not all that reliable. And all depends on how I ask the questions. I'm going to influence your memories. And you're going to read about that. Because I could say, what color were his tennis shoes? And you're going to give me colors. And then someone's going to go, wait a minute, he had cowboy boots on. Did he? So just say what color were his tennis shoes. I instantly make you think he had tennis shoes on. But what if he didn't? So it all depends on the questions I ask. Our memories aren't very great, and you're going to read about what influences that. How reliable are our memories really? But in this case, you remembered things because they were meaningful, because they were unusual. And you probably remembered things that weren't even on the list, that I didn't even say. I guarantee.
Ostrich on there?
No, there's no ostrich on here. There's a hippo.
I was so sorry.
There's no...
Did you say bear twice?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the next one I was going to say. Did you catch bear? I did say bear twice, and the reason... How many of you got bear? Show me your hands if you got... Okay, look around. Look at our hands. That's a ridiculously high number to get bear, because it's the only one I repeated twice. It was unusual. It was unusual. But see, not only did you remember it, you remembered that it was repeated. You remembered the apple. So you've got the unusual ones down. And you got the meaningful ones to you down for whatever reason they were meaningful. But now let's look at your list and tell me how many of you got fox. Raise your hand if you got fox on your list.
I don't think you said fox.
I did say fox. Turn around and look. I love what you said. I don't think you said it. Turn around and look the number of hands we have up. That would be none. That would be a big, as my son says, 0 numbers. There's 0 numbers of hands up. Fox definitely was said, but fox was right in the middle. How about parrot? Anybody get parrot? Why'd you remember parrot?
Because I like Jimmy Buffett.
Ah, parrot head. Any other reasons?
I have one.
Ah, you have one. There's the meaningful. There's the meaningful. For some reason, students have meaning attached more to parrots than they do to foxes because they're really close in the list, the original list I read you, very close. But parrots come up as being something more meaningful. Fox tends to be ignored. Like I didn't say it, but I did. Fox was right before apple, but none of us remembered fox. It was right after mouse. How many of you have mouse down? We got mouse, we got apple, we forgot that poor little fox. So nobody in a class this size remembered fox. You guys, and I always wonder how it's going to happen in a class this small, but you just represented something really interesting called the serial position effect. Because, let me go to this one. Zebra, look at your list. Zebra. How many of you have zebra on it? Look around, look at the hands. Look at, okay, ridiculously high. That was the first one. You had to go way back to get zebra. How many of you have chimpanzee on your list? Okay, that's a pretty good, okay, raise your hands and look around. That's a pretty nice number. It's not as much, but it's pretty nice. That was the last one. Okay. What they find is something called another thing that influences. Things that are unusual, things that are meaningful, and the position, the order in which the item falls. Serial position effect. This is the phenomenon that you're much more likely to remember information from the beginning and the ends of lists, not the middle. Poor little fox. So what they did is they read 13 items to someone, and they asked them to recall them. They remember the beginning, they call that the primacy effect. They remember those that fell at the end, they call it the recency effect. But in the middle, it's like they get lost. So they call this the serial position effect. It's very real. We have a tendency much more to remember information in the beginning and at the end, not so in the middle. This is very real. This is very interesting. Use this information wisely. For example, here, I think I have another graph too. There you go. So this is another one. So they went up to 20 on this one, which is very similar to the list you had. So the beginning, the ends are high, and look at the middle gets very low. Our middle is even lower than that. So what this phenomenon tells us, because we see it over and over and over again, and you just demonstrated it, is that we remember information better from the beginning and the ends of lists, not the beginning, or not the middle. Very real. So things like where I used to teach at the University of Connecticut, they had a really strong business program. And when you got a degree in business, they really prepped you and they helped you find jobs. You were interviewing on campus for really good jobs before you even graduated. And what they would teach their applicants to do is when you go out into the world and interview for a job, do everything you can to be one of the first people interviewed or one of the last people interviewed. Because there's been a lot of studies done that show very equally qualified people, those in the middle, they're not remembered as being interesting or even qualified, but they're very qualified. But they're forgotten about. They're in the middle of the group of those that are being interviewed. When you're studying material, keep this in mind. Don't put the boring or the hard stuff in the middle. You're going to have a hard enough time recalling it anyway. Best case scenario we're going to talk about in a minute is breaking the material up into tiny bits so that middle material is very small. Because if you study for an hour, there's a chunk of material that you're going to have a significantly difficult time remembering. That stuff in the middle. So don't study for a whole hour. Study for 10 minutes and then break. And let your brain work on that information. But this is a really interesting and fun phenomenon. Like they look at everything. They look at people going to shop for new cars, and they give them this list of cars, and they have to go find like the best car for them and the best value, and blah, 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 and they're gone for a whole day. And invariably, they pick some of the earliest cars and latest cars. And when they're asked about the cars in the middle, they come up with all these reasons why they don't want to pick them, when in reality, they barely remember them. So it's a very real, interesting phenomenon. Okay, this is what you're going to read about, how reliable memories are. That's what we were just talking about. Really interesting information here. You're going to read about the misinformation effect. Then you're also going to read about a study of Pestek and Hodge regarding kids and false memories, and what influences us to have these false memories. You haven't already remembered that. Okay, let's talk about this idea of somewhat permanent storage, relatively permanent. The air quotes around permanent when we start talking about long-term memory. Okay, the first thing on your outline is this Ebbinghaus and his curve of forgetting. So I brought this back. Remember this from the second day of class, we talked about this. Remember the black line? Oh, and by the way, this is slightly different than the curve in your book, because the curve in your book is on nonsense material. So this is a little bit later study looking at meaningful material. So we actually retain meaningful material just a smidgen longer than we do nonsense material. Not all that much longer though. So this is saying that by day 2, we're on the black line if we do nothing. If we just learn all the material the day, we listen to lecture, we go away. The next day, we're down to about 50 to 80% forgetting. So we've got maybe 20 to 50% recall by just the next day. We wait a week, we're down to maybe 10, 11%. That's pretty bad. You wait 30 days, which is about typically when we test, you're down to 2 to 3%. That's the curve of forgetting. That's the average curve of forgetting. It doesn't mean we're idiots. It doesn't mean we did drugs. This is just typically what happens. This is the average. How to alter it is really studying less overall time. Because in 30 days in this class, we've had about 12 hours of lecture. you remember very little of that information well enough to come in and take an exam. You're going to have to study for about 12 hours to get yourself back up to 100% if you haven't studied along the way. But look at the yellow line, that's how we alter it. Remember, by day 2, just 10 minutes of study. By day 7, just about 5 minutes. That's for every hour, by the way. This is for every hour. You'd have to tweak it if you meet once a week for your class, for a 3-hour class. But by day 30, we only have to review that information about 2 to 4 minutes per hour. So if we've had 12 hours, we're looking at less than an hour of study. And you're going to be close to 100% recall. It is phenomenal. This ability to alter our long-term memory, our forever forgetting, to increase our ability to access these long-term memories. He calls that distributed practice. So in your book, distributed practice is defined: spacing the study of material to be remembered by including breaks between study periods. That's right out of your book. It's as simple as that. Don't sit down and study for a 3-hour period of time and think you're doing yourself justice. You're not. Study for 15 minutes. 10 minutes and take a 3-minute break. 15 minutes and take a 5-minute break. And make sure you go back to it. But those breaks, research has shown over and over again, something magical is happening during those breaks. We're solidifying the information that we're trying to remember. It's actually these long-term memories that we're making. That path to them, we're going to talk more about this memory trace we create, is visited. It's kept primed. These synapses firing in a certain way are visited during this break period. It's very important to do. The more you study, the longer you study without a break, the harder it is to recall that information. And you've got a big middle period, which makes it difficult to remember that. Study for 10, 15 minutes at a time. Half an hour if you've got a really good attention span. Maybe go at half an hour. I certainly don't have that. My max is 15 minutes. And then I got to walk around. For me, whatever it is, if I walk around and move, I'm much better when I get back down to study again for another 15 minutes or so. So that's the psychic distributed practice. Very effective. Put that in your back pocket and take it with you for every class you're ever going to need to take. Okay. Oh, there we go. Not only do we need to review often, but we need to use distributed practice, what we just talked about. There's a definition in your textbook. All right. Now, A, B, and C on your outline, relatively permanent storage of information into long-term memory, but we do forget some stuff. And these are 3 theories about why we forget. The first one is the most simple, this idea of encoding failure. And it's really not about forgetting so much as it's about we didn't encode it correctly or at all to begin with. Remember encoding, storage, and retrieval? 3 processes of memory in general. If you look under Roman numeral 1. So it's not so much a problem of remembering this encoding failure, it's just that we didn't do this first process very well or at all. And therefore, we can't bring back this memory because we never encoded it to begin with. And there's a nice example. If you have your book open to this page, don't look at the answer. I want you to look at the PowerPoint. Show me your hand if you think you know. Now, think about the number of pennies we have seen in our lifetime. Thousands and thousands of pennies we've run across. Why aren't all of our hands up instantly? There's like 3 of you that think you know the answer. 4 of you. That's about not many of us. How many of you are positive? If you're, no? None of us? Okay, you're positive.
I already did this in the book.
See, she read the book. Good for you. Don't tell anyone. So we have one person. Did you know before you looked in the book?
It was between that one. I had like 2 things.
You were narrowing down.
And I picked the wrong one.
You picked the wrong one. That's funny. Why don't we all know this? I didn't know this.
Because you don't sit there and pay attention to it.
We don't what?
You don't pay attention to it.
We never encoded it. We never deemed it important enough to encode this into our memory systems.
So what's your guess? Which one's the correct pin?
It's either, I'm looking to it.
Go ahead.
Either E or J.
All right.
E.
You're shaking your head no. You're what?
I think it's J.
You don't think it's
It's
J?
not J.
D.
E.
E. Like you say E.
I want to say A, but I think that's wrong.
You want to say it, but you think it's wrong. Okay, here's the answer. You were right.
Yeah, but
It's A. Think of the number of pennies we have seen. How we sorted them. My son just found a penny today. He found he won the lotto. We have seen so many pennies in our life. We never coded what they looked like. Never deemed it important enough. That's an encoding failure. Okay, so that's the simplest type way to forget. We never really encoded it. So the next reason or theory about why we forget, it's called the memory trace decay and disuse theory. And we're going to talk about decay and disuse is pretty much the same thing. We tend to talk about decay for short term and disuse for long term. But in general, this is a theory that says, and it's an old theory, that we lose information because it fades, because we haven't used it. It decays because we didn't use it. Decay and disuse. What is decaying are these things called memory traces. Memory traces, a memory trace is a physical change to the brain when you make a memory. A physical change to the brain. Your brain physically changes when you make a long-term memory. It does. It's very cool. Now, what changes gets very specific, and it depends at what level you're going to talk about this change. But in general, we call this a memory trace, it's physical change. It's got a more official name called an engram. The process of the changing is called consolidation. But I just want you to know that a memory trace is a physical change in the brain when we make a memory. So what this is saying is, long-term memory-wise, is we make a long-term memory, and our brain, our synapses, are firing. Our neurons are firing in a certain sequence that they've never fired in before, ever, if we make a new memory. So something interesting happens. This process of our neurons firing a certain way. So it's kind of like you think about something that's happened to you. You can't wait for your 10th birthday, and you have your 10th birthday. And the next day, you're going over your 10th birthday, and I got this present from so-and-so, and so-and-so showed up, and Kim showed up, and she ate so much, and oh my gosh, she threw up on her shoes, on her saddle shoes. That happened at my 10th birthday. And so you have all these memories, and it's like you're storing them. And if you can't think of this analogy, if you're in the woods, and you're gonna go down this path to make these long-term memories, like your neurons firing down this new path that has never been fired before. So you're going to go down, and oh yeah, and so-and-so showed up. Oh, and Robin Gerber gave me that funny gift. Oh yeah, and she threw up on her saddle shoes. And oh my gosh, I got $25. And so you put it all right here. And you've never been here before in the woods. And this is where your 10th birthday party memories are. You've created something different in the woods. In our brain, we create a memory trace to keep these long-term memories. And then life happens to us. And we remember it, and we visit it every now and then. Oh, it was so funny. And, oh, yeah, and who gave you this gift? But then things happen, and our 11th birthday comes around, and our 12th, and our 13th, and our 14th, and our 15th, and our 16th, and we're making all these memories. And we haven't really thought about that 10th birthday for a long time. And what happens in the woods if you don't go down a path for a long time? It grows over. So if you put something there at the end of that path, but the path grows over, and you can't find the path anymore, does that mean those things are gone?
No.
You just can't find them. When you file something in your computer, because you've nested it in this folder, this folder, this folder, this folder, and you go to look for it, and you go, snap, where is it at? Does that mean that file is gone? It means you can't find it. That's the interesting thing in this theory. It says that thing has gone anywhere. The path to get to it has decayed due to disuse. So I call it the decay and disuse theory. That you just can't retrieve it. You encoded it and stored it correctly. You're having a problem retrieving it, but it's there. So this memory says it's relatively permanent storage in long-term memory. We just can't retrieve it well. If you can't remember, you're having a hard time retrieving it. Because this memory trace isn't being practiced. If you do this distributed practice that Ebbinghaus talks about, what you've done is you've put memories here, you're priming this line, these neurons firing a certain way, and then within 24 hours you go there again, and something strange happens in the brain. I mentioned this to you in day 2 of class, and you're probably going, what is she talking about? Something strange happens. It's like our brain is ready, primed, to fire again down this line that you created, this new memory trace. Because you did it once when you made the memory, then you did it again within 24 hours, you fired those neurons in that same sequence within 24 hours, and something about that puts your brain on ready standby. And that's ready, and it's ready, and it's ready. And within 7 days, if you do it again, it goes there even quicker. That's why you need half the amount of study to bring you back to 100% recall. And you go back, and that's why, and it stays primed. It's ready to go. It's ready to fire. It's like that line is primed. That path is cleared. And then you can wait now 30 days. And again, it's about half the amount of time to get you exactly to those long-term memories. Why does our brain do this? If you talk to a cognitive or neurological scientist, they would give you a much better reason than I could. Because from everything I can read, scientists haven't agreed on exactly why our mind does this. We have theories, but people aren't arguing that we do it. If you practice distributed practice, if you're studying a little bit frequently, you keep this prime. This memory trace is easy to access. It's easy to refire those neurons in that sequence again. And you get to that long-term memory. I'm going to count this as exercise for today, running back and forth. I'm going to check off on my calendar. I'm breathing heavy. That's the epitome of out of shape. If running 4 feet left and right is making you breathe heavy. Okay, so this is a theory that says we forget memories from our long-term memory because we don't use them. You don't use it, you lose it. Now, I say that's an old theory because it's not enough. If it were enough, our grandparents shouldn't be able to recall what they did on their 6th birthday. My next door neighbor was 92 when she died. She was one of my best friends. She was so fun, so alive, so smart. And one day we're sitting there and she starts telling me about the first time she rode in a Model T Ford. And I'm thinking, okay, she remembers that so vividly, probably because she's talked about it a lot. And then I said something to her about shoes. Because I noticed in a picture she had saddle shoes on. You know those black and white little girl shoes? The boys wore them too. Little black and white, what are they? Little patent leather saddle shoes, they call them. And I just always thought that's so cute on kids. And I was making comments. She goes, oh, my first pair of saddle shoes. We took the Model T into town to Woolworth. And they were 5 cents. And she's telling me this story. She was 6 years old, and she's telling me about a pair of shoes she bought. And then she goes, oh, Joe, I haven't thought about that day. I don't remember the last time. So if this theory were enough to explain why we don't remember, or why we do remember, she shouldn't have been able to recall that memory. She hadn't used or gone down this path or reactivated that memory trace in decades. So although it explains some of our forgetting, air quoted forgetting, it's really a retrieval problem, it doesn't explain it all. So you're going to read about interference theory, which is a more common, or not more common, more recent, that's the word I'm looking for, more recent theory about why we forget. And so you should have already read about this, prepping your notes. And just give you a heads up. If you've read it, go back and review it again. Come up with a way for you to remember the difference between the two. Your book does a great job. Gives good examples, good definitions, but I see students stumbling over this when it comes to quiz and test time. For you guys, it'll be a test.
Remember the difference. Know the difference between what proactive interference is and retroactive. Be able to give an example.
Okay? Any questions on this material so far?